So now that we know how to add tracks and a few of the options on creating tracking markers, let's go ahead and track this footage. Okay, we're going to talk about stabilization and a few more of the options in the tabs here that we have. Let's go ahead and let's just track one of these lights over here. It's a high contrast area, black and white. It's got a solid pattern. It should track very well. So I'm going to hold down Command and Option or Command Alt, and I'm going to select that point. Over here in my fine tuning area, I'm going to get that all centered up, and now we need to track this. So remember before I said that we have the playheads here. Now the playhead down here is for our viewer, so if I hit play, it's just going to play through and we can see nothing's following, or it's not tracking. So I can go back to the keyframe here that's blue, that's where we created the tracker. I can also see up here in the first keyframe that it was keyframed at frame 36, so that means that's when it was created. So let's adjust our tracking region, make it a little bit smaller here. There's not that much movement, so we should be good. And let's go up to our playhead here. Okay, now we have forward and backwards, and this is our tracker playhead. So when I hit play forward, it's going to actually track and follow this point forward to the end of our frame range. So let's go ahead and click that. We can see that during that time, our image did not move like it did before when we were playing it. Okay, and now we can see with this track being completed, at least in the forward area, we have a dark blue line on our timeline. Okay, so we have tracking information from here to the end, but we don't have any forward. Okay, so let's go back to our keyframe, first keyframe 36, and let's track backwards. Okay, now again, when you're tracking these things, you want to make sure that you're looking in this area to make sure that there's no jumps or anything like that. Make sure that it stays pretty solid on the area that you wanted it to be on. Okay, so now that we have that, what can we do with this? Alright, so we have this single tracking point that's basically tracking our translate X and Y position. Okay, you can see it's jumping up and down, side to side, and if we zoom in here, we can see the motion. So it's starting from the top, kind of jumping around and coming back. So that is the motion of our clip. Okay, that's where all that jitter, the handheld motion comes from. Okay, so now that we have this tracker, what we can do is we can actually come into our transform options, and in the transform we can tell it to stabilize or match move, remove jitter, add jitter. We've got a few different options here. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and do stabilize 1 point. Now what that's going to do is it's going to counteract that motion that we had before to keep it more stabilized. Okay, so if we look at this, once it loads up, we can see that we have this dotted line area out here, which is indicating that our actual backplate is moving up and out of our 1920 by 1080 range. And at the bottom we have a little, it's coming up into there, so we're losing a few pixels. But we've still stabilized the footage. Okay, there's not as much jitter. If I go ahead and turn this off to none, we can see that our jitter comes back, and now we're getting all this jumping up and down. Okay, I'll go back again so we can see the difference. It's much more stable there. Okay, now if you see, we're still getting a little bit of rotation here. It's still moving side to side. So what can we do with that? Well, let's add another tracker. Let's turn this back to none, and let's go back to our tracker tab. Okay, I'm just going to grab a point over here. You can go anywhere, but remember that this truck comes and cuts off most of the bottom portion. Okay, so I'm just going to go to this guy right here, another black and white area. And I'm going to hold down my Command Option to add another tracker, and I'm going to select that area. Come back up here, let's go ahead and line it up, adjust our areas, our regions. We should be fine just with that. Like I said, there's not enough motion. And let's track it forwards and backwards. Oh, there we go. That's what I just told you not to do. So let's go to something. Let's go ahead and just delete that track. And let's try one, let's say up here on the side of the building. Nice at the corner here. Now the reason we would want to use this corner of the window and not the center is so that we can make sure that this X stays right on that corner. It doesn't jump around in the center, which could happen and give us a bad track. If we have this corner, or any corner, selected, it gives a much more defined pattern. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this one again. So let's track forward. That looks good. Go back to our frame, track backwards. That seemed pretty good. Now we're getting a similar motion to this, to the one we had before, right? We're getting that bounce, coming back, and everything like that. But what this is now able to do is it can relay its information from our other tracker, our tracker 1, and we can actually get our rotation. So this point is moving up or down in a different way. It can counterbalance that rotation to get rid of that little bit of jitter that we saw before in the stabilize. Okay, so what we can do, what we need to do, is we need to tell Nuke that. We need to tell the tracker that. And if we look over here, we have our X and Y coordinates for both trackers. Okay, they're keying, we have their motion. And basically all they're doing right now is getting the information for the translate. So if I go to my transform options, I can see that translate is keyed and our center X of our comp is keyed. Okay, so what we want to do, now that we have 2 points, we can actually add in our rotation information. So the way that we do that is check on the rotation for both of our trackers. Okay, now in our transform we can see that it's rotating, and it keys that to kind of counterbalance when we either stabilize or match move. Okay, so let's go to our regular stabilize and our transform options. Instead of just the 1 point, now that we have 2 and a rotate, let's do stabilize here. Alright, as this goes, we can see that it's pretty stable and it's not quite rotating as much as we saw before. But there's still a little bit of jump in there, a little bit of jitter. I believe that's scaling. When you're on a handheld cam, you can't keep it in one space at all times, so you may go in a little bit, out a little bit, and we're getting a little bit of scale here on the edge. This is staying pretty stable. It's not as jittery, and we're getting that rotation back and forth, but we need to kind of stabilize that scale as well, get rid of this little warping. So we need a third tracker for that. So let's go ahead and find another point and track that. Alright, I'm just going to grab one of these guys over here, holding down my keys, selecting this point, and let's track it. Okay, track it backwards, track it forwards, and we have that. So now let's check on our translate and rotate for that, and our scale as well for all of these. Now having the 3 points here, they all move independently of each other. If one's on the left side of the camera, as it's rotating, it moves down or up, and the other side will move the opposite with the rotation. When we have 3 of them, we can actually see if they move apart from each other, which will give us our scale. If they either get closer to each other as the camera moves out, or further away from each other if the camera moves in. So having this information, checking these options on, let's go back to our transform. We can see now that we have our scale there, So we can see there is a slight bit of scaling that's happening there. Okay, 1 is our regular scale, so it's coming down a bit. Not too much, but we're getting a much better stabilize. And that's how you can use the tracker with either 1 point, 2 point, or 3 point for stabilizing your footage.